Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to be covering some of the latest updates to System Platform 2017 today. As you're probably fully aware, there was a big release around about 6 months ago, and this week we have released Update 1 for the System Platform 2017 release. So what we're going to be covering is mainly the new operations management interface, the InTouch OMI side of it in relation to this webinar, because the underlying technology is still very, very similar from a system platform perspective. There's obviously been some enhancements that, if you look at some of the previous webinars, they'll go into detail around that, but mainly this one is to do with that OMI interface. It's always worth mentioning the situational awareness graphics and things that we deploy throughout the system. And the reason that we keep bringing this up, because obviously we've been talking about this for a very long time, is because they're constantly striving from a Schneider Electric perspective to provide you guys with more out of the box, so your engineering time and your time to value is quicker. The whole point of situational awareness is about making sure that the SCADA screens are designed in such a way that operators can react to abnormal situations as quickly as possible. The two screens that you see on the webinar, they highlight actually exactly the same data. Just you can very, very clearly see on the right-hand side where the abnormal situation is, whereas it's actually quite difficult on the left-hand side. And there's still a lot of those SCADA screens on the left-hand side out in the world today. So why System Platform 2017? It's more than just a SCADA or more than just a HMI. It's our enterprise SCADA platform, or the industrial operating system. We're obviously hardware agnostic, and hardware agnostic even from these lower device level type solutions, because we're obviously branching out into things like IIoT. They require a much different type of connection to connect to those, and we're providing drivers that enable that functionality. The whole point of the industrial operating system that we're talking about with System Platform is that you can then bolt on things on the top of them, so it then gets more value than just controlling your plant. You can then, if you'd like to, branch out into your business layer. So if you're connecting to things like ERP systems to bring work orders down to the shop floor, then you can do that. So then you can have a fully fledged MES system, or just part of an MES system if you've only got the requirements to deliver something smaller like that. System Platform has a huge ecosystem of partners, and if you look on the Wonderware.com site, you can see some of those partners, and they integrate really closely and seamlessly with the product set. So if you see any gaps in the actual product itself, you can still get the abilities that you require just from going through one of the ecosystem of partners. There's some very clever things that some of our systems integrators do with the product set, and they share it with the wider portfolio from a partner perspective. I suppose it's always worth mentioning the differences between the two, just to start with. So if you look at the left-hand side, if we look at typical SCADAs and HMI packages, they tend to sit in this multiple tag space. So and InTouch standalone is certainly very, very similar in that regard. Our InTouch package goes up to 60,000 tags, so it's a whole host of tags that you'd have to sift through to be able to connect them to I/O points, be able to do animations and the like. Whereas if you move to something like System Platform, we develop assets, and it's much more structured, and the system understands it better. So you design a pump or a valve, as you can see in the middle there, and then we can associate everything alongside that. So our inputs and outputs to PLCs, graphics alongside it, so they're completely dynamic when you're dragging them on the screen, do anything like logic and scripting, etc., etc. Things like the seamless integration of Historian from this perspective is a real plus, because you're no longer having to configure elements on both sides. Inside the System Platform, you tick a box and it stores the data off for you automatically. These are the real benefits that you can get from having a much more structured approach. and it's much more structured from a customer or system integrator perspective, because we actually define something called the plant model. So the plant model is really just your physical representation of what's happening on the plant floor, or even up to enterprise level is shown here in best practice form. So at an enterprise level you might have multiple sites, then you go down to site level, then down to areas and work centres, so things like lines. And underneath there we have our automation objects, which are our units, which could be something like a reactor. And underneath there we've got our contained subcomponent, which might be things like pumps and valves associated with that reactor. It just makes a much more structured flow, and it makes the scalability of the product much easier to use. Things like propagation of changes, again, are very, very simple, and so you can change things in one place and it'll replicate through to hundreds of instances if you want to. We're then moving on to what types of roles are affected by using a system like this. And we talked a little bit about engineering effort, engineers, situational awareness, and things like out-of-the-box functionality. So from a standards perspective, like standards enforcement, that makes it very, very simple to do. If you're an SI that wants to develop a similar look and feel, create your own IP, to push that out to your end user base, then you can certainly do that. From an end user perspective, if you specify that you need, or you have a standards enforcement document that says, I need everything to be in these types of colors, etc., you can build that into the package and it'll replicate through the entire system. It's becoming much easier to use, so there's things like drag and drop to be able to get things on the screen quicker, and it engineers things in the background for you automatically. And it's certainly very highly scalable. That really replicates through from the object perspective. So if you have a set of lines, if you want to add more lines, you just create more instances of your objects. Then from an operator perspective, and this is really about how they visualize, optimize, and act on what's happening in real time on that plant floor. The situational awareness concept is key to being able to deliver that, being able to visualize, optimize, and act as quickly as they can do, especially to abnormal situations, and then try not to impact those operations that they're having on there based on the things that are happening in real time. And they're also constantly striving to improve things like security. In fact, every update that they release, they have a budget set aside to address some form of security that we're seeing in the market today. It's impossible to resolve all security aspects from a software perspective. But if you just address those extra elements that we're starting to see, so if some of the latest releases have removed things like default passwords by default, so you can no longer access a system by the standard users that you would have done a couple of years ago. These are the types of things that are really important for your IT teams and your admin teams, especially now we're seeing that IT to OT convergence. And it's also self-documenting, so it electronically tracks the auditing elements to the system too. So how has it differed for this latest interface? And I've obviously got some more detail on this, but they're making it even easier to use. So that drag and drop element that I mentioned before, this is something that has really come to the forefront when using this type of interface. Dragging a pump on a screen, which is a graphical representation rather than having to code the objects in the background or create instances in the background. You drag the graphic on the screen and it creates those instances for you. They've also got a new library of objects, so whereas we've been providing out-of-the-box graphical displays, which gives you that quicker time to value, they're now also creating the objects in the background created to ISO standards, so that you can again get even faster time to value from an engineering perspective up front, developing those objects. It's even more scalable from a hardware perspective because they're improving the performance of it. This new interface uses much less throughput than the previous client for lots of reasons. So again, we can get more out of our hardware. If we then look at just some of the software architectures, and the left-hand side shows where we've come from, so our device integration layer at the bottom level, then moving into things like historian, application server. So application server is that brains behind it, that's doing your automation through servers, storing data to our historian package, all fully integrated, as you're probably fully aware. And then Intuit System Platform is a visualization front end for the operators. Now, if you migrated to 2017 from 2014 R2, nothing would change there, so you could still continue to use that Intuit System Platform package. That hasn't moved. It's still been engineered, and there's still features and benefits from using that. But what they've now developed alongside it is this operations management interface. It's actually enabled by the same license on the same machine, so if you did migrate, you could then have a play with how it looks and feels for you. If we then just go into the roadmap and going back to the previous version, the 2014 and 14 R2, I'm not going to go through every point here, but what they have done is, it's really just to show you they make a lot of changes, and they've done lots of enhancements over the years. So they've all been pretty big releases. You can see an awful lot of things here related to alarm standards and alarm efficiencies, lots of out-of-the-box elements, life cycles and IT compliances. There's lots of things that they've done here, but you can definitely see a trend moving towards alarm standards. And the reason behind all of these improvements that they make, they think about the future. So the reason they did these things is because they knew that they were going to be developing a new interface, and the way that it would then seamlessly integrate into that was really important, and it needs to be an important change for you guys. The 2017 release, which came out 6 months ago, there's a whole host of features on there. So resolution independence is a huge one. It doesn't matter what size you engineer it from a development perspective. When you get it on your runtime machines, it's all going to scale very nicely for you. They've created much neater dashboards out of the box that you can use. From an IT compliance perspective, they've got zero install from a client perspective. So if you were using the standalone Intouch package as your visualization front end, you would have to install that Intouch on the thick clients or the operator interfaces at the other end. With this, that package actually deploys across the network. It just needs to know that that machine is part of that environment. They updated the licensing, which I'll come on to, and keeping in line with things like technology updates. They're using some of the latest technologies, and it's now multi-threaded, which talks to the whole business of reducing the amount of resources required to run your system. So this update 1 system has really brought on these extra elements here. So we have things like wider support for the applications that are already built into the system, and I'll talk more a little bit about applications shortly. They've got a whole host of things that already exist, things like title bars. The navigation application is something that has been around since the last version, but they've integrated the alarming aspects of that. They have reduced the footprint further, and also from a technology update perspective, they've released a web client for the standalone Intouch package so that you can get all those details on HTML5, and it doesn't even have to be an RDS server to achieve that, whereas it has been previously. Looking into the future a little bit, so Q2 2018, update 2 will contain these types of things. So we're going to start to see some camera application integration directly into the software, which will be contextualized. So it'll be able to react based on things inside your environment. That's the whole point of this new interface. It's the context that it creates behind it. So yes, we can certainly do IP cameras already with our Theme Manager solution from an RDS perspective, and it's very, very good at that, but this takes it down to software level. Things like autocomplete, so just engineering efficiencies that they're bringing to this space. And then, again, from a features perspective, things like improvements, being able to customize that navigation rather than having it more rigid. again, it's good to see these features coming through. So then just as a summary really on that OMI interface, it's delivering a much more modern user experience for everybody involved. It's a much more natural way to navigate around your applications. You can get KPIs in context, and that's what I really want to move on to in terms of the context element, because if you look at things like alarms, and this is really talking to some of the features that have been included now. The situational awareness, like I say, have been around for a long time, and you've got things like alarm borders that show up on the screen. But if we take a screenshot of the actual demo application in our environment, this comes from the new update 1, and what we can see there is aggregated alarms throughout the entire navigation panes. So wherever you're looking in the system, you can see what criticality of alarm you've got at what level, and drill down to that piece. It's also worth just mentioning the analysis type of things, because alarms can still be an issue with your SCADA solution. The idea is that you need to do continuous improvement to make sure these are constantly reduced. That helps us to keep this situational awareness trend, and the response times from your operators, it helps to improve those. So it's also important to make sure that you're constantly looking at those alarms and looking how you can improve them. And there's lots of ways that we can do that too. And then it's about contextualization in different ways. So I've got a couple of examples next for you. So we can see from an alarm perspective, yes, again, we've been able to script our solution so that when we display an alarm screen, it is relevant to the area. Whereas with this, because on the right-hand side there, you can see a faceplate for the overview window in the middle. So when we select the alarm element as associated with our faceplate, it will automatically only display the alarms that are relevant to the area you've got open, without the need for scripting. Again, reducing that engineering, reducing the reliance on making sure that you've done things correctly and you've replicated it throughout the entire system. We don't have to worry about that kind of thing anymore. The trend client or Historian Insight client has moved on since the initial release of it for the local on-premise version. So the trend client is, or the Historian Insight, is something that is more of a intuitive, user-friendly piece of software rather than the full Historian client trend. We can obviously embed that in here like we could do with the previous InTouch version. And that is a very functional product from an operator perspective, because you can look at very granular detail. You can get down to and pinpoint the real reason as to why something occurred. The idea with Insight is that you no longer need to know things like the exact tag names to be able to navigate around the system. But also, if we look at data in context, in the same way as we did with our alarms, if we look at the trend client in this faceplate, it will only display tags that are associated with the display that we're looking at. And you can see those little bubbles on there. That indicates that we've got some alarms that are displayed in there. And if we zoomed into that environment, then we'd see alarm halos over there. And you can see how long that was in an alarm state for, what was the reason, who acknowledged it. Just again, a very nice, neat thing that we've not really had before from a trending from a historian type perspective. You can now very quickly see where your alarms lie over your process data with zero engineering again in this case. There's an update to the navigation apps, and I've already mentioned some of that in terms of the alarms. They've updated the breadcrumb side. They've got runtime settings for your alarm, so you can turn on and off the features there. They've included styling support, so if you change the colors or anything to do with any of the styling, it'll replicate through the system. From a tree view perspective, it's worth just mentioning from this new interface point of view, for those of you that haven't seen any of the webinars, this is defined based on your plant model. So where I mentioned at the very beginning, System Platform provides a very structured approach to your physical plant layout. This is just displaying that plant layout that you've created a virtual representation of, which means that the applications automatically build themselves. You no longer have to drag graphics onto the screen to be able to display them. The navigation app will build it based on your plant model, and then when you click on them and there's graphics associated with them, the graphics will be populated in the screen automatically. From a title bar perspective, they've released a few more in there. So these are, again, out of the box, so no engineering. You've got things like the ability to language switch in there, log into the application, minimize, maximize, close the application. They've also got that hamburger app that we've all started seeing on our standard websites, especially when you get down to a mobile phone level. You see that app and you instantly know that is where my menu resides, so I click on there and it'll display it for me. These things are now included out of the box. They've also introduced something called a presenter app. Now this is very clever in the way that it works, because if you remember the plant model I just showed you and the navigation panes that can be brought up, if you looked at it from a very top level and click your presenter app, it would dynamically build all of the graphics inside of your window for you. So it would show you every graphic throughout your entire application in real time. So it would be updating live, and you could click on one of those graphics to zoom in closer and then start to control it, open and close, set point, asset types and things, and change set points, look at the faceplates associated with it. But the clever thing about this is it's actually dynamic. So if I remove graphics out of my system in the back end, so I took some of the graphics off the objects, this would automatically update. So the next time I use my presenter app, that graphic will no longer exist. It's dynamically building itself. So again, you don't have to engineer that into the application. It's just a very simple way to display everything there. I mentioned a bit about apps already, and the apps is the way forward to embed and look at a single pane of glass for your application so that you can get much more from it, especially from an IT perspective. There are some of the partners in the ecosystem that are developing their own, so things like a J5 logbook integration. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a way for you to be able to create notes inside of the application. So that's really useful for things like change of shift. So if somebody else came along and they go to a particular screen, because we now have data in context associated with that screen, there could be some notes from the last shift, and you can quickly see what's been going on. Things like Win911 for alarm escalations, again, they're looking at apps to integrate into this, and they'll start to come through for us. They've also, at this release, provided an SDK, so you can install, for example, code and shared libraries and things so that you guys can create your own applications. You can embed some of your, your controls, and you can use them in this new technology, the Windows Presentation Foundation and Windows Communication Foundation. Then, from an alarming perspective again, and trending and historical data, you can see all of these alarms in screen. So the previous release, if you saw it, the alarms were not in context. The alarm banner did not display them in the right way. It's now all inside of this system, so you can see all of those. From a licensing technology perspective, this is how they have moved to an activated licensing scenario. So they now have their own activation server in the cloud, which contains all of your information. You install a license server at your local level, and you essentially divvy up the licenses amongst your system centrally. So from a central management perspective, it makes it a lot easier to move those licenses around. You can also see exactly what machines are using what license, and also you'll never get any duplications by mistake. So we've come into lots of occurrences where our systems integrators will go on site, they'll install a consignment license to do some work, and then they won't remove it when they leave site, and then our support guys will get a call in 6 months' time and say they've got a plant down because the license has run out. And it's a complete mistake, they just haven't put the runtime license back onto that system. This will stop those types of problems from happening going forwards. Obviously, you don't need an internet connection direct to the cloud to do all that activation. There is an offline activation method to do that too. So just to summarise then, really this is about creating screen resolution independent applications. Your application will look exactly the same no matter what device you're running on it. So if you move from a 600 by 800 display all the way to high definition, and you do not have to rebuild that application. The reusability of the content enables a configure once and deploy anywhere type of approach for the lowest development and lowest maintenance costs. The smallest devices these days for us are things like the most personal, the most common are mobile phones. People have very high expectations of those mobile devices. They expect to be able to control everything by touching the screen and manipulating them. System platform, in this regard, from this new client, works on any device and supports that multi-touch interface, so we can do things like gesture interactions on there. And the HMI development should be focused on designing a user-friendly product and not having to rely on advanced coding in the background that's doing that for you. You shouldn't have to worry about things like the target platform, the deployment or the system architecture. And then from a IoT perspective, this system is even more open. So third-party software partners can leverage the application development environment to build native contextualized apps. Have you seen quite a few of those just recently in this webinar? Especially apps that enable the convergence of that IT and OT domain while maintaining that operational integrity of the control system. So with that, I'd just like to now ask if there's any